direction then, a little bit of an idea what we're going to talk about next week. The children of Israel have wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They are now on the edge of going into the promised land. When we get to chapter 3, there's actually 5 messages in the book in chapter 3. It starts out with this idea of the officers, the leaders of the people. They talk to the people. And then we have a message from Joshua where he challenges the people. And basically then Joshua then goes and he talks to the priests. And then God actually steps in and talks to Joshua and says, Joshua, look, I'm getting ready to do some amazing things here. And then Joshua goes back and talks to the people there. One of the themes that you see in chapter 3 a lot is this idea of knowing God, knowing that God's going to take care of your need, knowing that God's greater than nature itself. And so let's look at again, I don't have time to read all of it, so I've just got to pick and choose sections. So we're going to start in the beginning of it in chapter 3. Here is what it says. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went over to Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you're to move out from your positions and follow it. And then it goes on. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. That's about a half a mile. Okay? And do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourself. For tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. So as we get into this, I want to make sure we have an understanding of what exactly happened and how it all plays out. So I want to talk a little bit about the Jordan River. I want to talk a little bit about the ark, and then we'll kind of follow through the story. Here is a map of the area that we're talking about. You see Mount Hermon up at the top. That's actually where the Jordan River starts. And it goes all the way down to the Dead Sea. Now, if you were to fly this in a plane, it's 90 miles, about the distance from here to Omaha. But if you were to actually go down this river and chart out how much area, it covers almost 200 miles. So it is a windy, curvy river. Mount Hermon starts at about 9,000 feet high. The Dead Sea is, I think, 1,800 feet below sea level. So when you go from 9,000 feet in a river to 1,800 feet below sea level in 200 miles, that is a fast-moving river. Now, if you were to go to the Jordan River today, I've been there. You go to the Jordan River today, there's actually a dam that holds the water back up by the Sea of Galilee. So today it's a nice, calm river, but back then it would not have been so. So to give you a little bit of an idea, this is kind of what it looks like. It's roughly about, in most places, it's around 100, maybe 150 feet wide at the widest. However, it's going to be double that during flood stage, which is when the children of Israel crossed, by the way. What I want you to pay attention to, and what most people never think about in this story, look at the far side of the river. And what do you see? You see a bank. Here's some other pictures of it. Notice that other side of the river, it's not that smooth, sloping, walk into the water kind of thing. This is actually an area where they do baptism. This is kind of another picture of it. So notice the bank. That's what I really want you to pay attention to, because I think that's going to be a big part of our story. Here's an idea of what it would look like when it was rushing during flood stage. So if you'll think about this for a second, by the way, when the children of Israel, when the 2 spies are sent across the Jordan River, they don't walk across, they have to swim across. Here's a question for you. Where does a desert person learn to swim? Because the 2 spies had to get across this thing at flood stage. Average feet is 3 to 5 feet of the river. During flood stage, 10 to 12. So, don't push off the spies as some wimpy guys. I mean, these guys were gutsy, all right? So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about that river deal, because you have to understand the children of Israel are about ready to go across that. So I want you to put yourself in their head for a minute. For 40 years, you've been surrounded by desert. You're about ready to go into the promised land. And what do you see? A raging river in front of you. There's a lot of imagery in the Bible. There's a lot of imagery in the Bible with regards to the Jordan River. The Old Testament, the most famous story is this one. The New Testament, Jesus is baptized at the Jordan River. So we do see some imagery there. I don't want to take away from all of the songs that talk about the Jordan, crossing the Jordan like going into heaven, but here's the reality. The reality is the Red Sea is a picture of the salvation experience. Being saved from your enemies, the Egyptians, being saved from sin. The Jordan River is really a picture of the Christian life. Because when they cross the Jordan, they have battles. When they cross the Jordan, they have to conquer things. When we get to heaven, it's all over. There's no more battles. There's no more struggles. So it's really more of a picture of the Christian walk. And you're going to see this as we talk this morning. Roughly about 1 to 2 million people are who we're talking about. And it's going to take them about half a day to get from where they are to the edge of the Jordan River. When they cross this, you know the story, the waters are going to be rolled back. The waters are going to be rolled back all the way up to, you would say Adam, we call it Adam, about 12 miles upstream. So there's going to be an area of roughly 12 miles that's dry. In addition to that, you also have to remember this. The Ark of the Covenant, they got to keep a half a mile between them and the Ark. So what's going to happen is the priests are going to go down into the water. The waters are going to part. They're going to park there. We'll talk about this in a second. They're going to park there for a while. All the people are going to go across dry shod. Then the Ark is going to follow, but the Ark's half a mile away. Okay? But it's within sight of these people, and that's going to become an important part of our story. So let's talk about the Ark of the Covenant. And I know, fortunately, Indiana Jones has helped us here. This is a ballpark idea. There are different ideas on the Ark. You need to know that. And the issue is the angels on top of the Ark, which way were their wings facing? So sometimes you will see it done like this. Sometimes you will see it done like this. Sometimes you will see the back wing stretched out and the other wing stretched forward, forming what some people believe to be a seat, so to speak, because it was the idea that God sat there, God dwelt in that Ark. In that Ark, of course, you have the Ten Commandments, the rod, and the manna. This is the dwelling place of God. This is where God was dwelling at that time. Typically, when you see it carried, you'll see it carried like this. If you want to know whether or not somebody is biblical in their portrayal of this, this is not. Numbers chapter 4 says, anytime that it was carried, it would be covered with a blue cloth. So typically, one of the ways that you will know whether or not the writer or the painter was accurate is you'll see it covered with a blue cloth, somewhat similar to something like this. So that's how they would carry it down, all right, with it. And again, everybody's going to cross. Remember this. There are only two people that were at the Red Sea experience. Joshua and Caleb. Everybody else, the oldest person in this group is 60, other than Joshua and Caleb. So these people had never experienced the Red Sea. Or if they did, they were little. I guess if they had a teenager, they'd remember it. But for a lot of them, that was just a story for mom and dad. And now they were going to experience God in a new way. So this is kind of the story that you have laid out. Basically, what's going to happen is, listen to what this, again, I hate using this sometimes because you can get lost in this, but I love what this commentator said about this passage. The ark was carried in front of the people, not so much to show the road as to make a road by dividing the waters of the Jordan. And the people were keeping at a distance from it, that they might not lose sight of the ark, but keep their eyes fixed upon it, and know the road by looking at the ark of the covenant by which the road had been made. You understand what the writer's saying here? He's saying, look, the whole purpose of them focusing on the ark, because everything changed at this moment. Everything that Israel knew was about to be turned up. Their world was going to be turned upside down. For 40 years, the tabernacle sat in the middle of the camp. For 40 years, every day, they could get up and they could look at a cloud and they could know their God was with them. At night, as they got ready to go to bed, they could look and they could see the pillar of fire going up from the tabernacle. They could know that their God was with them. The tabernacle had been taken down now. And now it was an ark. And now it was something they weren't going to see every day. So now their mindset has to change from a God that they can see to a God they have to trust. And this is going to be a big challenge for Israel. And so the way this thing starts out is the ark goes as the ark goes by in the camp. It was in the middle of the camp, and as they start taking it, the people start following the ark. And then as the priests go down and the waters part and the ark is there, they keep their eye on the ark. And then the ark follows them. Why? Because things were going to change for Israel. And Israel was now going to have to learn to trust in a God they didn't get to see every day. And this was a scary deal for Israel. So what happens is, this is what he's saying. He's saying Israel's going to have to realize, and this is going to change them dramatically. So then we come on, basically God comes to Joshua. He says, Joshua, look, I'm going to do some amazing things here so the people know that just as I was with Moses, I'm with you. And so then we come to the next passage, and it says, so when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priest who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from the upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarephath, where the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jordan. And then he goes on to say, and the priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant stopped in the middle of the Jordan, stood on dry ground, while all of Israel passed by, and the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. This little city of Adam is 12 miles from where this crossing is. So you have a stretch of over 12 miles of dry ground, and Israel walks across. When we get them across the river, they're about 5 miles from Jericho. That'll play out later on in the text as we go further in the story. So basically you've got the picture. The priests walk through the camp carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Israel's focused on the Ark of the Covenant. They go down. Now again, remember I said the banks play into the story? Do you realize that when you go over the edge of the bank carrying the ark, you're committed? So I think sometimes when we get this story, we get this idea that it's all nice flowing thing, and the priests walk up and they step back and it just departs back. No. The priests go over the bank. And there's one of two things is going to happen. Either the water's going to part or they're going to get wet. And I think that plays into our story as we talk about it. So what happens is Israel, the priests go down, the water's part that goes all the way back to Adam. Everything is dry. Israel now walks across. The ark is sitting there. All the people walk by and they see the priests there. They walk all the way by, and when they get all the way out, the priests come back and then the water comes back. I think there's a lot. First of all, there's a ton of practical lessons in this passage. So, but I've just got to pick a few. So here's the first one. How committed are you to Jesus Christ? I mean, I appreciate what Rich said this morning. He finally came to a point in his life sitting on a rock and said, okay, God, let's get this all cleared up. I want you to know I'm all in. Are you all in? Because you see, these priests made a decision when they went over the edge of that bank, and it was an all-in kind of commitment. Dads, you know what we need? We need dads who are all in for Jesus Christ. We need men and women who are all in. None of this, I'll kind of go to church, or I'll kind of do the God thing when my schedule works out. No. We need people who are all in. And you need to understand, Christianity is an all-in kind of thing. And Jesus made that very, very clear. Unless you're willing to take up your cross and deny yourself and follow me, you can't be part of me. Because Christianity is an all-in kind of thing. And one of the things that amazes me about this story is this wasn't going to happen until the priest committed and headed into the water. You got to remember, they hadn't been promised anything. All they knew is the land was theirs. There was that suddenness, if you will, that commitment that said, you know what, we're going to do this. And we're going to go in and we're going to commit ourselves to cross this river. You see, you have to put yourself in the mind of these people. They're desert people faced with an overcoming obstacle of a raging river. And I'm sure they were disappointed when they left Shittim to head to the edge of the Jordan River, take about half a day's journey. They all get there and they're going, what in the world is that? You expect us to swim across that? And I'm sure there was a huge amount of disappointment for them. But what happened? The leaders, the spiritual leaders of Israel stepped up and said, don't worry, we'll lead the way. You just follow us. You know what we need today? We need men and women and Christians who will stand up and say, I'll lead the way. Say what you want about our political system and all the crazy stuff and all the stuff that's going on. But you know what? We have some good, strong men and women who are Christian, who are trying to make a difference. And you know what? They're trying to lead the way. Get involved. We have men and women here who have gotten into the sports thing, and they're coaching kids, and they're saying, you know what? I'm so tired of the silly stuff that I see going on that I'm going to be a kind of example for these kids, and they're stepping up to the plate. And we have people in all kinds of organizations who are stepping up and saying, you know what? I'll lead. And that's what it's going to take. If we're going to make a difference in this world, that's what it's going to take. And one of the things that happens is these people are now heading into the unknown. Again, the God that they were able to see, they don't get to see anymore. And so they're saying, you know what? We'll follow. Because there's a group of people who stood up and said, we're the Levites, we'll lead. We'll lead spiritually. I think that's a good question for us. How committed are you? You know, so many times I see people standing off on the sideline. And you don't want to complain to me. Because if you complain to me, you want to know what my answer is going to be? So what are you doing about it? And I get tired of the whiners who go, well, I don't like this and I don't like it. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? Get involved. How committed are you to really following God? I think a second question that comes out of this story is this. Is the God of the desert the God of the promised land? You see, that's what Israel had to wrestle with, because standing in front of them was a barrier. A barrier they had never experienced, a barrier that they were afraid of. And by the way, it's a barrier that the Canaanites on the other side of the river took comfort in, because they knew no army in their right mind would try to cross the Jordan River at flood stage. So all the people on the other side of the river, all the Canaanites, they're kicking back going, hey, we're okay until the flood season's over. Nobody's going to come across that river now. Why? Because their trust was in the river. Their trust was in that barrier. That was their safeguard. And God stepped in and said, you need to understand, I'm bigger than the river. And God showed to Israel that the God of the desert was the God of the promised land. But in order to do it, they had to put their faith and trust in Christ and be willing to step in the river. And it's no different for us in our Christian life. One of the things that I think you have to wrestle with, in the little book I read, and it's out of print now, I think. I don't know. I haven't seen it in print for a long time. It's a little pamphlet. And it was titled, Your God is Too Small. And basically the idea was this: how big is your God? Oh, Pastor, you don't understand. We're struggling in our marriage, we're struggling in our marriage, we're struggling in our marriage. How big is your God? Oh, things are really tight for us financially, and I don't know if we're going to make it. How big is your God? Oh, we're struggling with our kids, and, they're making bad decisions, and we don't know what to do. How big is your God? That's one of the things we faced in this church over and over and over again. How big is your God? Can God take care of this or not? And one of the things Israel had to realize was they had to make a decision. Can our God get us across the river? And God said, yeah, I'm going to show you. Watch this. But before I do, you need to be willing to step into the water and get wet. I need to know you're willing to take a risk here. I need to know you're willing to trust me here. I need to know that you're willing to follow me here. And if you're willing to take the first step, I'll do the rest. And that's my challenge to us, I think. Sometimes we forget. And so there are big trust issues. Do we really trust God? I mean, I love him. But, I went to my doctor and he said this. Well, okay. How big is your God? Well, we're struggling with it. How big is your God? Is the God of the desert the God of the promised land? Israel had to wrestle with that. And you know what they said? We'll follow. Last thing, and I think is a big challenge, is the power of God that saves us is the power of God that will lead us. So let me explain this for a second. Israel had left Egypt 40 years before. They had stood there and watched as they crossed the Red Sea. They crossed the Red Sea, and all of a sudden Moses does his thing, and the water comes crashing down, and they watch chariots and horses, and Egyptians just die in the river and go floating down the river. That's what their parents experienced. They may have been a little kid and seen some of it, but for the most part, it was their parents' experience with God. Now, it was going to have to be their experience. I am fortunate enough to be, I think, a fourth generation Christian. Christianity was in my parents' life. It was in my grandparents' life. But here's the thing. You can't live off of your parents' Christianity. I'm thrilled that you have the story of my dad was a godly man, my grandfather was a godly man, my grandmother was a godly woman. I'm thrilled that you have that as your history, but you can't live off that. It has to be what you experience. It has to be what you do. Israel was now getting ready to experience God. And you know some of the stories, Jericho, how God wipes out cities, how God leads the way for them. Israel was that's why God says, I'm getting ready to do some amazing things. But they're going to be things you experience. Here's my challenge. Are you experiencing God at work and sharing that with your family? Dads, nothing against women, but you need to be the ones praying. I love it that my kids were able to hear my wife pray for them every night in the bedroom, stuff like that throughout all the year. That's one of the great characteristics of my wife, one of many. You know, the bad one is she had a goof up and married me. But other than that, I love that. But your kids need to hear you pray, Dad. Your kids need to hear you say, this is what God did today. This is how God's led us. They need to be part of the stories. I'm thrilled that you're involved with their sports stuff and their 4-H stuff and all the crazy stuff that kids get involved with, their dance stuff and their all the stuff that kids come to you with I'm raising money for this. Okay, you know all of them. They need to be sitting. One of the reasons we have kids in the service, we want them to see moms and dads worshiping. That's important to us. We want moms and dads leading spiritually. It can't be your parents' Christianity, your grandparents' Christianity. As my kids were growing up, even to this day, we share the stories. This is what God's doing. This place exists because there were a lot of times that this church just stepped out and said, okay, God, we know this is what you're going to do and we're going to trust you. And the community looked at us and said, you did what? It was God. It was God. And I want to challenge you this morning because I'm afraid sometimes that when we start dealing with second, third, fourth generation Christian, we're trying to live off of somebody else's Christianity, and you can't do that. And Israel had to realize that. So they had to experience the Jordan for themselves. And it laid a foundation for them where God said, I love the idea of the imagery of the ark. Think about this for a second. You have always seen the cloud. You have always seen the fire, and now it's not there. And you don't know what to do now. You don't know if your God's bigger than the God of a Canaanite. And you don't know all of these things. And so as you get ready to cross and everything changes, you keep your eyes focused on the ark. And the ark prepares the way for you. And then as you walk by, you look at the ark and you see it off in a distance. And then as you get out of the Jordan River, all of a sudden the ark comes behind you. It's the idea that God is there in your past, your present, and your future. And God has laid all of that out for Israel. And Israel, and what God is saying to them is this. When you go into the promised land, you make sure you keep your eyes on me. And so there has to be that commitment. There has to be that idea that God's going to be the God of the promised land as well as the God of the distance. And then there has to be this idea that I am going to follow God. At the end of this book, you know what Joshua says? You do whatever you want. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. We're going to keep our eyes focused on that ark, on God. So I end this morning with this. The crossing of the Jordan is a perfect picture of the Christian life. It starts with an all-in commitment. It's followed by keeping our eyes on Jesus as he leads us in the path that we have to go. We can overcome any barriers we face in our lives by keeping our eyes on Jesus, just as Israel had to focus on the ark. Let's pray. Lord, help us. God, we live in a world that just so often pulls us aside. tries to get us sidetracked, tries to get us to focus on things that don't matter. Lord, give us the courage to take the steps that we need to do the things that we need to do. Help us to keep our eyes on you. And Lord, for people in here who have never experienced salvation, who have never put their faith and trust in you, I just pray, Lord, that they would wrestle with this idea that you love them, that you came to this earth for them. And above all else, Lord, you want them to be your children. So Lord, help us all to be honest with ourselves before you, and we'll give you the honor and the glory and the praise these things we ask in your name. Amen. Let's stand together and